Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently, and Thriving Teams, When Teams Unite, Align and Achieve. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions, and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently. I interview thought leaders from across the globe. I hope you enjoy the podcast. So many leaders I speak to aren't short of ideas. They're short on space and confidence to actually bring those ideas to life. Creativity at work can sometimes feel like a luxury, something we will get to when things slow down, but it never slows down. So what if that's exactly what we need right now, more creativity? I'm joined today by Paul Fairweather, one of the leading voices on creative leadership and workplace culture. Paul began his career as an award-winning architect before expanding his work into helping organisations rediscover their creative confidence through what he calls bold thinking, building the courage to create and the confidence to connect. He's also the author of a new book, Bold, Brave and A Bit Quirky, which is a part memoir, part manifesto and part mischievous nudge to anyone who's ever had an idea they feel too scared or too busy to bring to life. Paul, it's such a pleasure to have you on the Thriving Leaders podcast. Welcome.
Claire, it's fantastic to be here.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for that introduction. I think I have to hire you as my PR person.
Thank you. I might have found my calling. So let's find out a bit more about you and your story. So for our listeners who might be new to what you do and why does it matter?
So look, what I do, and as you said, I was an architect and I've been an architect for most of my career, but for the last sort of 10 years or so, I've been doing this work. It matters, I think, because, and it matters more and more as we go deeper and deeper into this AI, because there's really, I think, a loss of connection with creativity, which I believe has helped us connect to other people. And so it's really important. And we can get into it, but creativity is misunderstood. That's probably the biggest thing. And it's not just about artistry. I happen to be also an artist, but that's only a small part of creativity. And so it's really, looking at people, solving problems in a creative way and not relying solely on AI.
Yeah. So you brought up AI a couple of times. How do you think AI helps us be more creative? Because sometimes it can also take away creativity because people just go with what AI is telling them and not their own ideas too. But how does AI help us or hinder us in being more creative?
Well, I think it is a real seesaw. I'll start with a hinder. And I recently read a part of Helen Garner's, one of her yellow diaries from 1984. And she had this little snippet from a larger entry. And she just said, at the dinner party, the surgeon asked me why I didn't use a dictaphone or a word processor. Remember, it's 1984. And she said, well, why would I? And he said, because it's quicker and more efficient. And she said, but it's my life's work. And I think this is a crux, and this is sort of becoming my personal philosophy around AI, that if it's my life's work, well then I don't go to AI. It might be easier, it might be quicker, but why would I? And so I think the thing is, the challenge that we have is a short-term gain with maybe a long-term deficit, because I do believe that it probably erodes cognitive abilities, and it certainly, I think, in some ways erodes our ability to think creatively. I think that what it comes down to is where it can help is those mundane things that take time, that have to be done, that take away time from your real work. Well, that's a good use of AI. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of people use it as a substitute for their own thinking or doing. And I'm guilty of that, but I have come to realize recently that maybe I've got to do more of hands-on stuff, because that's going to give me a better life, because it's my life's work.
Yeah. So you started off as an architect, or a lot of your career was an architect. In the last 10 years, you've moved into the creativity and leadership space. What led you to that kind of transition, I guess?
Well, look, I was the CEO of a large architectural company of 55 people. And I've been an artist my whole life, and architecture, certainly parts of architecture is creative. I see myself as a creative person. So, and I don't have an MBA. I started a solo practice, and over 20 years, built it up to 55 people. So, it was a natural course, I suppose. It was my path of least resistance to land on that intersection between creativity and leadership.
Mm. And so, how do leaders bring more creativity into their leadership? What do you suggest?
Well, look, it comes back to this thing about understanding what creativity is. But I think it's really interesting. I was doing this thing with Matt Church, who's a thought leader, and he has this sort of definition of creativity, saying that that we expect our leaders to take us from anxiety to confidence and from confusion to clarity, and to take a challenge and build a vision for a better future. And I love that model of leadership. And what I realized when I heard that was that's exactly the creative process, except that you have to stay longer in the confusion, and you've got to stay longer in the anxiety, and you've got to stay longer in the challenge to get a creative result. The old A-type leader was right. This is where we're going. Who's coming with me? Even if they didn't know where they were going, because that's what seemed to be, what they had to do. So the reality is that it's the same model, except the leader needs to understand that to be a creative leader, they need to stay longer in that uncertainty, but give their team confidence. That doesn't mean the wheels are falling off the bus. It just means we are taking more time to find a creative solution, as opposed to this time-based thing. If we need something, we need something, we need something. So it really is about creating that space for that creative thinking and doing, in some cases, how to do that. So that's the first part. There is another part to it, but that's the first part of it.
Yeah. You've talked about it's based on how we define creativity. So how do you define creativity?
Well, I've defined creativity in many different ways, but on my podcast, The Common Creative, which you've also been a guest on, we had a fellow whose name was Jake Kahuna, the big Kahuna. It actually wasn't so big, but from New Jersey. And he started this business, and he wanted a definition of creativity before he started. And he came up with this, which I'm adopting and adapting. But he said creativity is identifying potential or an opportunity and then fostering its development. And I think that's what creativity is. And if you look at that as an umbrella, it's everything. It's whether I'm painting or whether I'm drawing or whether I'm looking for new business or, finding a new way of production or whatever it is. It covers everything. So in some ways, the looking at opportunities is the idea or the insight, and then the fostering it is the doing. And so creativity, in my mind, is not just about ideas, it's also about the doing. It's the flow through of those things.
Yeah, which I think is so important, because I think some people can lean one way or the other to be the ideas person, but maybe not execute, and likewise, and maybe they need to lean on different strengths within a team too. I like that your definition's built on someone else's idea, because also I sometimes think that when we think we're creative, we've got to be starting from scratch. And I do think creativity sometimes is refining, adapting, building on another idea too. So you've said that you're an artist, you're an architect, you're a creative. And when I did come on your podcast, I shocked you probably with my first response to say, I don't identify as being creative. However, what do you say to people who might not see themselves as being creative or might have that limiting belief that might hold them back?
I basically, there's a couple of different approaches. One is I talk to them, because by their own admission, they end up going, oh, actually, I am creative, when they start talking about the stuff they do. I had one client, she told me I don't have a creative bone in my body. And it was because all her family were artistic and musical, and she wasn't. And so she saw that as creativity. And she said, oh, actually, when I was in my 20s, I used to go down to Paddy's Market on Saturday afternoon, buy a bolt of fabric, go home, sew a dress, and go out in it. And I'm going, well, if that's not creativity, what is?
Yeah.
And she has since said to me, and she works in a very, very pragmatic area. And she said, yeah, you've shown me that I'm creative. So that's the first thing. The other thing is I talk to them and say, look, I explain that creativity is not relative. I explain to them that, why we sort of had creativity drummed out of us, about the fact that creativity is not artistry. It's only a part of it. That's sort of a big part of it. But in my workshops I run, what I do is I get people drawing in the first 5 minutes. And of course, everyone says they can't draw. But I say, well, if you make a mark on a bit of paper and you're not writing a word, well, that's a drawing. Now, whether it's a good or bad line or good or bad drawing, that's purely subjective. But then what I do is I teach people how to paint a watercolor lemon. And I've done it in such a way that it's almost foolproof. I don't draw it for them. I don't touch their brush, but I give them a direction to a point, and then they're on their own. And what I found is it's a very, very simple process, but most of the people that I deal with have don't even remember picking up a paintbrush, the majority of them. And this is just a little exercise to build their creative confidence. And they go, oh my God, that is so, And then at the end, I do a big reveal because I frame them all up in the break or when they're doing another exercise, and there's a big reveal of all these pictures in these little frames. And it's a secret to making art look better is to whack it in a frame. It's just a tip for listeners. It makes it at least 67% better. And all of a sudden, they've got an artifact that they create, and it's just a reminder to them that they are creative. And then we go to other exercises, which are more pragmatic, but rely on some creativity, and they have a lot more confidence. So, that's the simple way that I do it when I can have time with people. And and sometimes when I have meetings, I'll take along I call it Lemonata. I'll take my Lemonata kit, and we'll just do it with them, and they go, "Oh my God, that's amazing!" And so it's really, and I do a lemon. There's some reason I do a lemon because of the colours and transparencies, but I do a lemon because under my tutelage, you'll get a painting of a lemon, not a lemon of a painting.
So, what unlocks for people going through this process of drawing the lemon? Like, what do you feel like that aha moment for them is?
Well, look, it's part of a larger model that I have, not my seed model I took about in my book, but another model. And it's about in the first instance, it's actually about being present, because you have to look and you have to see. And a lot of creativity, I start my keynotes with a quote from Einstein that says, "Creativity is seeing what everyone else saw, but thinking what no one else saw, but thinking what no one else has thought." And this is sort of part of this. So it's actually about looking at, something. So being present, that's the first thing, in observing. And a lot of creativity is about observation. The second part of it is it's a simple process, but people are very tentative. I've had people saying that, I'm scared to pick up this paintbrush because I still have a hangover, not a hangover, I still have a overhang from when I was 14 and my art teacher told me I couldn't paint. It just unleashes a little bit of creative confidence. And the reason I do that is because the brain doesn't really know the difference. If you're, doing that challenge or that little creative project and solving that little creative problem, or solving a creative problem at work or in life. So it just helps rewire the brain a little bit and build creative confidence. And so that's the process of it. And as I say, they get an artifact to take away, which then becomes a reminder, like, oh my God, and it just helps that link because, we all have memories. How many workshops have you done that you don't forget anything? You forget everything you ever did, but they have this reminder. And I know, I've been doing it for years, people still have them on their desk. And so, it's the start of a process, but it's also a memento.
And it's also probably that reminder. It's like, oh, I can do this. Like, I was proud of it. It makes me think of going with my girlfriends to a sip and wine or wine co thing where you draw and then afterwards coming home and being like super proud of this Monet picture that I replicated or the Frida picture that I painted another time. So
look exactly. I before I did it in my workshops, I used to do it one-on-one with people, and I used to do a bowl of lemon because we had more time. And there's one guy, very successful financial planner, mortgage broker, has built multiple businesses and sold them and rebuilt and stuff. And he shocked me because he said, "Oh my God, you have, shown me something about building my creative confidence, and that I can do these things." And I thought, my God, you have built these businesses. I'm in awe of you. Yet this simple exercise unlocks something in him. Look, some people, what I encourage anyone, and this is what I, in the seed model, I encourage anyone or everyone to take up some sort of creative hobby. It doesn't have to be painting lemons or watercolor, drawing. It can be music or guitar or singing or crocheting or whatever it is, because all that helps rewire the brain into that and taking on a challenge in a safe environment to be able to then learn to solve problems.
Yeah. And I think it's sometimes like honing in on what that creative outlet is for ourselves, because sometimes we lose momentum with it, and sometimes it's nice to kind of pick up that paintbrush or whatever it might be for you to get those neural pathways going again. Yeah.
And look, the best way to find, if listeners are going, "Oh, I don't have a creative hobby," whatever, is to go back to the thing that you were doing before you hit puberty, or the thing that you say yourself all the time, "I wish I could draw or paint, or wish I could do stand up," or one of those two things, because that will open a door for you. And quite often it's that thing that you stop doing, and we stop doing things impunity because of we have this idea that we need to have the world as a realistic reflection of who we are and vice versa. And if we can't draw photographically, we go, oh my God, I can't draw. And then we have peer pressure or lack of support or active discouragement from parents or peers or teachers to go, you're crap, you know. So all those things sabotage us. And so whether it was singing or dancing or whatever, that's one place to go back to. The other place is all those things I wish I could, because there's something deep inside.
It's funny, like I feel like I'm picking up a lot of things that I've done in my childhood more recently. In the last few years, I've taken up tennis again. I'm actually thinking about playing basketball again, which I played. I've recently been playing the piano, which I used to learn. So things like that that go back to before you have those limiting beliefs or it's been beaten out of you. So you've mentioned the seed model a couple of times. I'm curious. Tell us a little bit about this model.
So the seed model is a little model that I have in my book, and it's basically the S stands for the seed. So it's really about the seed of an idea or the seed of a creative hobby. So my view, as I've mentioned, is that I believe creativity in the workplace, like charity, starts at home. So it's really up to people individually to step into their creativity and not sort of demand that it's supplied by others. So that's the first bit. The second bit, the E, is environment. And that environment is an environment that I believe companies need to create for people, a space for people to be creative together without the expectation of profit or productivity. Um, and it doesn't have to necessarily be team building, but it's whatever it can be within, within a work environment or whatever, but to allow some space to allow people, whether it's about the thing about failing or experimenting or whatever, or doing some team building things, which we did a lot of in our architectural practice. So the second E is espalier. So an espalier is a grid of, a trellis. And when you espalier a plant, you train it along. So my model is sort of based on this idea that the second E is espalier, and that what we do, if every sort of column is conformity, control, and compliance, and then every row is the things that we do in business, HR, sales, management, production, all these things like that. And basically, that's where the seed is a lemon, in this case, a lemon tree. And that's where we pick the fruits. It's very predictable. We've got to comply with external regulations. We've got to conform to, client expectations, and we've got to control the outcome as leaders. So all those things are things that are needed for building a business to survive in the first place. But what the idea is that, because the analogy is a citrus tree, if someone's growing a tangerine or a kaffir lime, you can graft that on to the main trunk and you can let something grow. So the idea is that from this environment they create to allow this creative thinking, to then allow some of those ideas to flourish, again, outside of the grid, outside of the challenge, to let it explore where it is. Now, the business and the leaders, they can prune at any time, or they can trim back, or they can let it grow. And if it's successful, then they can train it back into the espalier, into the framework, where all the things that they do to need to take that idea to make it successful. So it's the idea of, and again, it's one of the misunderstandings of creativity is that we don't have time to be creative. We've got to do this. All that stuff's important, but you're more likely to only survive and not thrive unless you can make that allowance for that growth of some creativity in a way that allows freedom of growth, but then using the systems you have to take that and leverage that into a successful product or service or process.
Awesome. I love the model. And you'll be happy to know that just outside the window here is a whole bunch of citrus espaliered trees that my husband has very neatly. But I think it's a really good metaphor because it requires creating the environment for your citrus tree to grow in that formation, but then they also do sprout out. And we've had grasshoppers attack the lime tree, and we've had to pick all the lemons off as well so they don't get attacked too. So I think there's probably lots of metaphors in that seed analogy too.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you've created this book, and I know some people will just be listening, but it's a very visual book. It is very beautiful. It's got lots of amazing art and imagery in there. So what inspired the book, and what conversations are you hoping it sparks?
Well, look, there's a couple of stories about the book. The first thing is that for my whole life, I didn't believe I could write. All through my architecture career, I never did any technical writing, hardly ever wrote any letters. I found it very difficult because I'm undiagnosed dyslexic. I'm definitely dyslexic. I had to repeat grade 2 because I couldn't read, and I almost failed school English all through school, and I still get B's and D's mixed up and left and right and things like that. And I found out I could write by accident because someone, and I write about it in the book, I tell the story, someone asked me to write an essay for a design book. I didn't have the right sort of folio to be included in the book, but he wanted to include me. And I said, oh, mate, I can't do that. I can't write. And he said, oh, talk to my editor. And I went, okay. He said, look, who knows? She might even ghostwrite it for you. And I thought, okay, we'll give it a crack. So I had a chat to her, and she said, Paul, look, just get off this call and put down some stream of consciousness about your ideas for this thing. So I said, okay. So I did that, and I'm a great procrastinator, and I managed to get the words down, and I sent it off to her, waiting to her to come back. She said, we'll have something to build on. 2 days later, the guy that commissioned the book called me, and he said, mate, I read your piece. And I was going, oh, my God. I was embarrassed. I went white. I thought, oh, my God. I was like I was naked. And he said, I love it. Oh, my God. And so I thought, oh, that's how you write. So it's a really sort of subtle thing that I worked out about how to put my words on paper. And it takes a longer explanation, but that's what's happened. So that's sort of the first thing. And so it started me writing. And then I was doing a thought leaders thing, and someone said, you need a book. And I said, what sort of book do I need? They said, it doesn't matter what sort of book you need. No one's going to read it. You just need a book. And I went, well, if I'm going to go to the effort of putting a book together that no one's going to read, I might as well do the book that I want to do.
Yeah.
And so that's why I did the book. But interestingly, until recently, my art has always taken the second rung in my life. And I wasn't going to illustrate it because I didn't want it to detract from me as a writer. And when I look at the book, I can't even believe I seriously considered not including the illustrations, because that really embodies who I am. I'm this visual storyteller, and there's a whole lot of stuff about words and images going together and why that's so important. And that was the manifestation. So and that thing about writing the book that I want to write, because, I've got enough models and theory and IP to write probably a couple of books. Yet, I thought, for what purpose? And I also had these stories. Everyone says, oh, memoir's hard and whatever. So I just combined the two together. I went, well, here's some memoir. And at one stage, the tagline was creative misadventures. But it's just stories, from my life. And then it's some observations and some of my models and a bit of my IP. And it's not woven very tightly together, but there are sort of lessons in each story. But I just allow other people to make their links, and it's so interesting what people respond to. I've had so many emails saying, "Oh my God, this struck a chord," and and it's bizarre because, like, one guy the other day, he said, "Oh mate, that story about the Mars bar, that just brought this stuff back to me because it's about Catholic guilt as a child." And he said, "That's the thing." And I go, "Oh my God," because no one has said that yet, And so, it's so interesting, responding. I think that as it is difficult putting a book into the world. It does challenge your imposter syndrome, or challenge my imposter syndrome, and the thing about, oh my God, what if there's a mistake in there or whatever. But I told it to schoolmates, and I have some school stories in there, and I thought I'd be taken out the back and beat up behind the door. But yeah. So anyway, that's probably a long answer, Claire.
But I think there's something about creativity and the vulnerability that comes with being creative, because writing a book is a creative process, and there's some vulnerability because you're putting yourself out there, because you're putting your ideas out into the world. And I think that's probably what holds us back from being creative, or those limiting beliefs, or being judged by others. And I think that there's this tension that we've got to sit with when we put things out, and how we get confident with those things, but we can still have limiting beliefs about other creative outlets.
Look, without a doubt, 100%. And I think the book's up there with stand-up comedy, which I've also done.
Yeah.
It really is up there, because stand-up's only there for 5 minutes and it's gone, but the book stays forever.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think that you raise another really good point about the power of storytelling, whether that's through comedy or what have you, but as leaders, how powerful stories are. Because the feedback you've got was less about the models, but more about what people have taken out of it. And I think it's, how do you create the right story for the moment that you're trying to share with your people so that they can take the insight of what it actually means for them, and that there's art in that.
Oh, look, there's definitely an art in that, and I suppose there's a lot of people that they tell a funny story because it's a funny story, but it's got nothing to do, or it's inappropriate to the point at hand. But yeah, the art of storytelling, because I think you can craft the same story around many different meanings, and so but it needs to be very conscious.
Yeah. So what are, we've talked about some limiting beliefs that people might hold. Are there other myths about creativity?
Well, one is, as I said, yeah, that it's mistaken for artistry. The other is that it's comparative, it's relative.
Mm.
So if in my keynotes I show them my creative credentials, which includes all this sort of stuff, and I say, "Who here is creative?" And no one puts their hand up because I'm
Yeah.
intimidated. And I've done it deliberately to prove a point. But even when I don't do it, I only still get a couple of hands because people they're very conscious about saying that I'm creative.
Mm.
I don't know what it is. Well, I do know what it is about that. It comes from this childhood thing that we have, and I think the artistry thing is a really big thing.
Like in your seed model, you talk about the environment that you need to create. And I think that like creating a holding environment or a space for people to brainstorm, to ideate, to pick apart ideas, to be creative, whatever it might be, is so important, especially for a thriving team. So how can leaders like really practically create that space for creative thinking, whether that's for themselves or for their team?
Well, look, I think that the important thing is and back to this whole thing about we still need to have compliance, conformity, and control to get the
Mm.
stuff done.
Hmm.
I think what happens is that people say we're going to be creative, that we have to be creative all the time. I have a scale that I invented called pragmativity scale, pragmatic thinking one end, creative on the other. And you've got to be somewhere on that scale. And what I talk about, it's important in the first instance for the leader to define the script. And I don't mean the script in terms of the story, but in terms of like it's a metaphor. So basically, if a project or an idea is fully scripted, it's the Nike. Just do it this way. Okay.
Yeah.
That's how we're doing it. And there's not much room for creative thinking for whatever reason that might be, whether it's deadline or budget or a really strong idea from the leader. Then we have the ad lib. So the ad lib is like, so the leader says, okay, this project is ad lib. Here's a rough idea, but be free to add. Okay, as you go. And then some projects can be improv. So, okay, you know, and also, what are we doing, and really freedom. And I think it's important to understand that different projects or processes have different criteria. And it's up to the leader to find that so that people understand and they don't get, disappointed and feel rejected when they come up with an idea when the leader in his mind's got the whole thing. And equally for the leader, if he's going, well, I'm not getting ideas from anyone, but they're thinking, well, it's fully scripted, you know. So I think the first point is on any project or process or whatever it is that the leader defines the ground rules for what the creative thinking is in a time bound thing as well. And it might be, look, I'm happy to iterate right to the death. We can change this project anytime if it's going to make it better. But that needs to be defined. Otherwise, team members get very disparaged.
Yeah. I think that's really important. Even I've got a session next week with a leadership team around decision making and just being really clear of what the inputs are, what we're there to do to make a decision. It's not necessarily that we're brainstorming ideas. And there's a time and a place for that. And kind of putting the guardrails in place around what the expectation is of what we're there to do can be really
Exactly.
challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the bumper rails. The mid one is the bumper rails, and
Yeah.
like we're gonna keep them in this sort of zone. And that comes back to that thing about Matt Church's leadership model about the uncertainty and the anxiety and the challenge is to when it is ad lib or improv to say, look, if you're one of these people that need to know the answers and stuff, you just have to relax. We're here, you know, we've got a safe space, the buck rests with me as a leader. I'll take responsibility, but I just need everyone, to think more broadly and not get too anxious about the result while we find a better solution. So I think it comes down to very good, in the first instance, understanding by the leader, and then that communication of that to understand the parameters. Because I remember as a young architect having this idea and going up to this boss and going, "I've got this idea," and he goes, "I don't pay you for ideas. I pay you to draw lines." go back to your drawing board. It's like, all right then, you know.
They're the stories that stick with you, aren't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but which changed my leadership model when I was
Mm.
my own company, giving people the freedom, but within those bowling alley bumper rails to explore things,
Yeah.
and not let them go, unless it was, like sometimes, like it's just back to that script.
Yeah. Because you spoke about this anxiety, ambiguity, kind of helping people understand how to operate in in the grey. What if you're a leader who doesn't like playing in the grey yourself? Like, do you have any tips for them?
Well, look, I think that, there's obviously leaders out there. I think that they've got a choice. If they want to be creative, then they have to deal with it. But
Mm.
if they go, well, I can't deal with anxiety though, so I'm not going to be creative. There's different leaders for different areas. We've got our own skills. We can't, you know, change people. But what I do when I do these exercises and keynotes is explain to people this whole thing about fear, the whole, it's in our genetics. It's, why we're here and our ancestors aren't, or our other people aren't because they got eaten by the saber-toothed tiger because they had no fear. But our ancestors had enough fear not to enter that cave where there might be danger. But
Mm.
the thing is that, these fears that we have and this anxiety is no longer life threatening in 99.9% of the cases, and
Mm.
it's just, but it feels like it is. And so I think that what I would encourage them to do is to go back to that early thing of pick up a creative hobby that you need to improve at. So start painting or start playing the violin or singing or whatever, which you'll be crap at, and it will make you anxious, but it will build your confidence, and
Mm.
it's in a safe space. And then you can bring that back to your workplace and go, right, I've just got a little bit more confidence, a little bit more space. I understand that this is going to end up with a better thing. So that's really what it is. And the workshops that I do, and I also do some drawings in my keynotes. People, the audience does drawings. It's not art therapy, not unless they need it to be art therapy. I don't deny them, but there is a simple thing, drawing and painting is primeval. It preceded written language. In fact, written language came out of, drawing on walls, and it might have even preceded verbal language. So it is a sort of a basic communication thing, yet, we've really, put it aside in so many ways. So basically, it's really important to sort of to address that and go, this is not life threatening.
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes the fear can be quite paralyzing for people. How can teams be more creative day to day?
Well, so I said earlier, I start my keynotes with this quote about Einstein saying that creativity is seeing what everyone else is seeing, but thinking of what no one else has thought. And 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 that's a sort of, and I actually demonstrate that showing a painting of Starry Night by Van Gogh and how he saw the world differently or thought about the world differently, for whatever reason, but he did. And then I show an image of from the Hubble Space Telescope. And when I overlay the two, the skies are almost identical. It's to say, look, could he see into the future or see further than us? But it's only half the explanation because that's about not accepting the status quo in some ways. There's a great book by David Brooks called How to Know a Person, and in that he has this quote that says, "Seeing someone well is an act of deep creativity." And whilst he unpacks that differently in the book, he sort of talks about mirroring and things like that. But I see it very much the same thing Einstein is seeing. To see someone well is an act of deep creativity because we have to see someone. We have to drop our prejudgments, our biases, our first impressions, and the subject of our gaze to be really seen well needs to drop our mask. And it's through those things that we can create connections, and connections are incredibly important for creativity. So if you skip sort of further forward to say, well, we basically, no idea has ever come into the world without the help of someone else. There's
Mm.
nothing really, even my painting that I do, I'm painting on, I didn't, you know, harvest the flax to make the linen. There's a chain, there's people involved in everything. And so this whole, I think, of, ideas or individual, but innovation is with the team. So in order for those things to be combining, the curiosity is the individual, but it's the culture of the team. And for those things to combine, we need to be able to connect at a deeper level. And so this thing about seeing people more differently. So, like, you know, I have this process in one of my workshop where people drawing and they're drawing their past and things and sharing it. And it was used to be a throwaway. It used to be a warm up exercise, and now it's a key component of it because what happens in the end? People go, "Oh my God, it's so fantastic to see, and understand people better in my team." And we do that through drawing, and they're able to do that drawing because they've already got the creative confidence because they're already painters already. So drawing is nothing, so it's easy. So it's really about that thing about, you know, being vulnerable and transparent. So having the environment to do that so you can connect and bring your ideas to innovation. That's how I believe, teams need to be creative.
Awesome. So if you're a leader of a team, is there something quite tangible or practical you could do with your team to help them be more creative or set the context for creativity with your team?
Yeah, look, I think there's lots of things. It partly goes back to the script. I think one of the easiest things is some simple exercises of, to get people thinking differently. So we've got a problem, we're going to think differently. Okay, so what we're going to do is everyone get a large A3 bit of paper and draw 20 circles on it. Now you've got 2 minutes to draw something different each one of those circles. They start easily, smiling face, pizza, cake. It starts getting a little bit harder. Cricket ball, snowflake. Dinner plate. Like and it's sort of quite hard. But once you start, all of a sudden, ideas start flowing. And so that's the first thing. Almost if you're going to get people to attack a creative problem, it's like the gym. You gotta stretch. You got to stretch your mind a bit. You got to warm up. So that's sort of that's the first part of it.
Awesome. I think that's a great idea, just to kind of warm up the muscle, and whether that's like a precursor to then kind of seeing the expectation of what you're there to do as well. Beautiful. So, Paul, if you could leave our listeners with one thing or one message about thriving teams, what would that be?
Look, I think what I would say is that I go back to that quote from Helen Garner about it's my life's work. And I think that in a team, to identify, I'm not talking about, the passion of saving the world, but, something that really connects with you, that relates to your work and your team, and making that, clear to the team, and getting everyone to do that. So everyone has an understanding of where people are coming from for themselves, rather than going to team, well, let's just get ChatGTP to do that. Because, that's like all getting around to fast food. It feels good for 5 minutes and it feels like crap. So I think it's really about being very clear about what you have to contribute, in an open conversation, and then moving forward from that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think kind of drawing on the strengths of the group as well, and
Correct.
what their purpose and value is, can help then lean on those strengths as well within the team. Awesome. Well, Paul, thank you so much for your time on the Thriving Leaders podcast. I really appreciate it.
It was fantastic. You're a fabulous interviewer and your questions are great. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Paul is someone who genuinely makes you reconsider what creativity actually is. It's not artistry, not some rare gift that some people have and others don't, but the capacity to be able to see an opportunity and do something about it. By that definition, every leader in every team is capable of being more creative than they currently are. A few of my key takeaways that I'll be building into my own work: his idea of defining the script before you begin. Whether a project is fully scripted, ad-lib, or improv is so practical. It takes away the frustration that comes when people either hold back thinking that the leader already has decided, or come in expecting this open discussion where the parameters are actually really tight. Being really explicit about this from the start changes everything. And I loved his point about creativity needs connection. Teams are more creative when we build on each other's ideas, where there's enough safety to be vulnerable, share a bold idea, and not be cut down for doing it. Well, that's psychological safety. But also not having to have the final product polished. How do we actually refine and work together as a team to create something bigger and better than what we came in with? I hope you got as much out of this conversation with Paul as I did. Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, facilitation, keynote speaking, or executive or team coaching, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful tips on leadership and team development, as well as our podcast. You can also grab a copy of either of my books on our website, and it's also available on all good online retailers, including Audible, Spotify, and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive. Please subscribe.